Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For more than 100 years, the Democratic Party was organized around the interests of ordinary Americans. Democrats ran campaigns on things like higher wages, better working conditions, against the banks that crushed their voters with debt. A lot of Democratic ideas didn't always work. Some were silly, but their focus was always clear. American citizens were the party's priority, and that is no longer the case. To the modern Democratic Party, Americans are an afterthought. Try to find a Democrat running this year, for example, on the opioid crisis or high energy prices, the collapse of public schools, the decline of the middle class. Hard to find one. Democrats are bored by these topics. What interests them is power. In order to win and maintain power, Democrats understand they need reliable new voters, voters who will support them obediently without making difficult demands like a higher standard of living. That's why the Democratic Party suddenly supports open borders so fervently. Immigration is really the only issue that matters to them because packing the electorate is the only way they can regain control of this country. Their goal is clear, and they will do or say anything to achieve it. Here, for example, is the governor of New York likening the Trump administration to Islamic terrorists for the crime of daring to enforce federal immigration law. Watch.
They are on a jihad to deport as many people as they can who they believe are not in the United States legally.
Who they believe are not in the United States legally. Pretty easy to determine whether someone's here legally or not. And it wasn't that long ago that leading Democrats like Bill Clinton, for example, argued in public that our country should deport illegal immigrants. They're here illegally, after all. They're breaking our law. Now, Democrats claim that non-citizens, even illegal ones, have a right to vote in our elections. That is happening in San Francisco and in parts of the state of Maryland. But the 2020 election, it'll be happening in many other places. That's guaranteed. Now, you'd think congressional Republicans would be upset about this. Allowing illegals to occupy and run our country makes a mockery of citizenship. It's terrible for America, and it's a death sentence for the Republican Party. But nope. Republicans on the Hill seem okay with this. Here's one example. In 2014, the Obama administration changed the rules so that anybody claiming a threat from gang violence or domestic abuse could get asylum in the United States. The effect was to allow pretty much anybody to permanently enter this country provided they supplied the right story, and many, many did. Of course, that was precisely the point, to open the borders without saying so. Well, earlier this summer, Attorney General Jeff Sessions reversed the Obama rule. Now, House Republicans somehow, for some reason, are teaming up with Democrats to stop Sessions from doing that. Just yesterday, they tacked an amendment onto an appropriations bill in the House that would preserve the asylum rights of anybody who claims to be fleeing gang violence. That change would nullify any effort to secure our southern border. Mexico and Central America have plenty of gang violence. Now, all 150 million people who live there can cite that fact as justification to move here legally and stay permanently. When they get here, they'll find Democrats eager to give them the right to vote. House Republicans could stop this. They're not even trying. One person who thinks Republicans ought to care about this issue is former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. He just wrote a piece about the left's plan to win through non-citizen voting. We spoke with him just a short time ago. Here's what he said. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us tonight. You've argued that the entire point of the Democrats' immigration policy is to increase their electoral share. How do you think this works?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. They think they get the vast majority of votes from illegal immigrants in San Francisco. They've now made it possible to vote without being a citizen. There are other places around the country where Democrats are advocating that they allow people who are not here legally or people who have not yet become citizens to vote. And I think they think their calculus is that they have a harder time winning an election with law-abiding Americans. And so the more people they can bring in who don't know American history, don't understand the Constitution, aren't part of our traditional values, the better off their chances are. I think that's why every single Democratic senator co-sponsored Senator Feinstein's open border bill, which would literally have opened the border to virtually everybody in the world to come to America.
When you were Speaker, there were about 22 million foreign-born people in the United States. That number is now about double. Republicans have controlled the Congress for a lot of that time. Even today, Republicans on the Hill are trying to undo the one of the Attorney General's efforts to tighten the border. Why don't Republicans on the Hill understand the threat that these policies pose to the country and to them?
I frankly don't get it. I mean, let's start with sanctuary cities, which is the most popular position that President Trump has. 84% of the country, 8 out of every 10 Americans believes that sanctuary cities increase the risk of crime. Now, that should be pretty easy for Republicans and, frankly, for common sense Democrats to unify around in terms of establishing a public policy. But I think part of what's happened is you have the constant drumbeat of the liberal media, which intimidates some Republicans who forget, and I recently wrote a paper on this, the weakest Republican position on immigration is 60%. That's absolute control of the border. The strongest is 84%. That's closing down all the sanctuary cities, and in the case of California, closing down the sanctuary state. Yet Republicans often behave as though they represent a minority interest, when in fact even most people who are here as immigrants would like to see a law-abiding country that's physically safe.
The Republican Party won't exist as a national party at this rate fairly soon. So a lot of members I know on the Hill can do math pretty well, but they don't understand that calculation.
Well, I think somehow they lose their nerve. I mean, when the drumbeat all day, every day from the New York Times and the Washington Post and various liberal media, the drumbeat's constant, and if you are in favor of controlling the American border, as I am, I'm in favor of legal immigration. I can tell you that I even voted in 1986 for the Simpson-Mazzoli Act, which did have amnesty, which promised us control of the border. Ronald Reagan signed it reluctantly and wrote in his memoir, his diary, that the only reason he did it was to get control of the border. The Congress broke its word. We had 10 times as many people come in under amnesty as we were told, 3 million instead of 300,000. And then the President Reagan didn't get the things he'd been promised, which were a work permit system and control of the border. So ever since, I've been very skeptical. There's a large part of the national elite that for some reason loves immigration of any kind, dislikes controlling the border under any circumstance, and routinely smears people. If you say I'm for legal immigration, but I'm against people crossing the border illegally, somehow that becomes a xenophobic, anti-foreigner, even though you're for legal immigration.
Right. Well, you're attacking their housekeeper. They've imported an entire serf class to serve them, and they resent any efforts to restrain it. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you.
Most of us grew up